Just want to welcome you back. This is part B of core concepts. So hopefully you're here because you haven't done the MCAS-Alt before, or it's been many years. So welcome back. This is what we're going to look at today, this afternoon. We're going to talk about the data charts and the brief descriptions, what that evidence should look like, and that popular question about calculating accuracy and independence, and self-evaluation, and that's for all content areas, not just for the ELA language and reading and math that we're concentrating on in this part. And then we'll talk about some important reminders. So here we go. We're going to start with brief descriptions, and then we'll get to data charts. So brief descriptions you will find on a data chart. And what these are a way for you to tell us what's happening in your classroom. Since we are only asking for 2 pieces of evidence, we want to know on those other dates what is happening in your class. And so in order to understand what you're doing, we're asking you to tell us what the skill was that's assessed. And we talked about it a lot in that first half about how that skill must be the same skill that's in the measurable outcome. And then how did the student demonstrate that skill? What were the instructional methods or approach? What kind of material were used? So we want to know what and how in those brief descriptions. And although we don't talk about scoring here, I will tell you that generalized performance is an area that is scored. And all that is measuring how you differentiate the instruction. If you don't differentiate the instruction, such as you do working with a student and you're doing ABA, and so it's the same approach every time, that is perfectly fine. The scores are either 1 or 2. So when you tell us that how, you're telling us how you're differentiating it. So don't get hung up on it. Just know that it's part of the scoring process. When we talk about brief descriptions, and I said it earlier in that first half, I talked about being aware of the verbs. You don't have to keep saying the same name of that verb. If you're using identify, you can use a synonymous verb in that brief description. You can see here we have a lot of different names for sort, or match, describe, and compare. Those are pretty commonly used in the entry points. So I ask you to be aware, because when you do that skill, if you choose a entry point that has the word describe at the beginning, then the scorers will expect that that skill will include how they described. However, if you choose describe, but your student is only identifying, those are not the same. So you want to be careful when choosing your verbs. So here's an example of a brief description. I'm going to give you the measurable outcome first, and then we'll talk about that brief description. The student will represent data from a survey graphically with 80% accuracy and 100% independence. So as you can see, the actual skill is to represent data from a survey graphically. You teach this activity, you're assessing this activity. The brief description that you tell us is that the student displayed data from a class survey on a bar graph by coloring in the correct categories. So you can see here that what's in red is what the skill is. What did they do? They displayed data from a class survey on a bar graph. How did they do it? By coloring in the correct categories. And you can see that this activity is aligned and documents that measurable outcome. Remember that you're going to include only the skill that's listed in that measurable outcome in the brief description. So that's all I'm going to add. I'm not going to include extraneous information that's unnecessary, because then the scorers won't know what you're taking the accuracy and independence on. So be very clear, very succinct in your brief descriptions. Give us what the skill is and how the student did it. When you're doing brief descriptions for the reading strand, you want to have a title of the text in each of those data points. Sometimes just the title alone is unclear, or you get you download something from the internet and it doesn't really have a title. In those cases, you can make a copy for us and give us a small sample, but you're going to base your strand on either literature or informational text, not both. So you can see here, I highlighted in each of those brief descriptions, a title. Okay. Instead of copying an entire book or a whole lot of information that we don't need, all you need is a small sample of the text. So just some ideas for you. You can do a screenshot of the text. You can scan it to the flash drive and put it in the binder. And I do know that most copy machines now have a scan function. You can just print it out, include it in the binder, and just make sure that the dates agree with the dates on your data chart so that we know that they correspond to those dates. But you don't have to. If it has a title, you don't need to give us a copy of that text. So now we're going to get to the data charts. Your choice of the data charts can be a line graph, a bar graph, or a field data chart. And I'll show you some examples in a moment. There's going to have the student's name, the learning standard. Remember all of that information that we had on the strand cover sheet. The data points are going to have at least 8 different dates in which school was in session. So 8 dates you're going to do between now and when it's turned in March. And then you're going to have the percent accuracy and independence of those responses on each of those dates. And we'll talk about accuracy and independence, I promise. And then, as I just said, those brief descriptions underneath each one are going to have what the student was asked to do and then how they did it. So this one is Alex Keaton, and you can see that it is under math, number, and operations in base 10. So we have the student's name, the measurable outcome. Remember, we looked at this on the strand cover sheet that he was going to round whole numbers to the nearest 100 using place value. And then the criteria that the teacher set up was 80% accuracy and 100% independence. Remember, that stays the same, not going to change. And it's always a good reminder when you are looking at your data chart, look at the measurable outcome now and again. So you remember if your brief descriptions are documenting the measurable outcome. There's the percent accuracy and independence for each of those data points. 8 different dates. Now we always say if you can do a couple extra just in case something goes wrong. So in this case, there are 8, which is the minimum. Fine. And then the brief descriptions are underneath. And those brief descriptions would explain what the student did and how they did it. One thing we used to talk about with teachers is if you had 2 different color highlighters and you went through your brief descriptions, could you highlight what the student did in one color and then how they did it in a different color? So each one would have 2 different colors on it. Here's a line graph. Same information that was on the bar graph, just a different format. And it doesn't matter to the state what one you use. Sometimes it's just a matter of what you're comfortable with. Maybe if you're going to share with parents, it's easier to use either the bar graph. Some people like that better, but that's your choice. And then the last one we have a little bit different. This is called a field data chart. And later in the end of this, Kevin will show you what this looks like and how to set it up. But this one works really well for students who do not produce a lot of work or any work. If you're using access skills, this is a response by response data collection. So you see the dates are up on top. And oops, sorry. The dates are on the top here. There's also a key for the data collection. So a plus is accurate, a minus is incorrect, an I independent, and a P for prompt. So once you have that established, you can do day by day and those different trials, up to 10 trials on a day. So it's totally up to you which data chart you want to use and what works best for the population that you're working with. One thing you don't want to do is to have that first data point be 80% accurate and 80% above 80% independent. So 80 and above in both accuracy and independence on that first data point, that will not be scored. That data chart will not be scored. Because what that says is that the student already mastered this. Now, if it's just a blip, like maybe lucky guesses, don't use it. Use start where they are. Try it another day. But if that first one is 80% in both accuracy and independence, it won't be scored. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have 0, 0. If you have data points that are 0, 0, they won't be counted as part of those 8 dates because nothing happened. If the student didn't do anything, maybe it was a refusal, it was a tough day, just don't use it. Don't put it on there, okay? So now we're going to give you the opportunity to see if what I just said makes sense. We're going to talk about these brief descriptions after we look at the measurable outcome, and you're going to determine, after we read the question, Kevin will put the poll up there and you'll decide, is it acceptable or not acceptable? So let's start. So put your thinking caps on. I know it's after lunch, but the more you participate, I think you'll start to understand this better. So the measurable outcome says that Larry will answer comprehension questions about an informational text with 80% accuracy and 100% independence. The brief description that was given says, Larry answered 4 questions about the main idea. So go ahead and answer that question. Hum a little tune while you're waiting. All right, I'm going to go with 80% that participated. That's my mastery. So let's take a look at this. 84% said it was not acceptable, and 16% said it was acceptable. So let's see. He was going to answer comprehension questions about informational text. But it just says that Larry answered 4 questions about the main idea. If we were in person, I would ask you why it was not acceptable, which it is not acceptable because there aren't any titles. Remember, we need the titles. Okay, good job. See what the next one says. Pasquale will connect money to decimals by rounding to the nearest dime with 80% accuracy and 100% independence. The brief description says that Pasquale sorted nickels, dimes, pennies, and quarters. Acceptable or not acceptable? At least you're consistent. We're at 80%. So I'm going to share the results. We have 83% say it's not acceptable and 17% said it's acceptable. So he was supposed to connect money to decimals by rounding to the nearest dime. but the activity that they did was sort nickels, dimes, pennies, and quarters. So it's not acceptable because there weren't any decimals, there wasn't any rounding to the nearest dime. So if you said acceptable, I want to make sure that you understand why it's not acceptable. Next one, Sophia will demonstrate the meaning of a newly created compound word with 80% accuracy and 100% independence. And the brief description says, Sophia put puzzle pieces together to create compound words, butter plus fly. Acceptable or not? Okay, a little more than 80%. Good job. So this one is a tough one. I'll share this with you in a moment. So it's 57% said not acceptable, but 43% said acceptable. This always trips people up because she's putting together compound words. But look again, because this is all about vocabulary acquisition. So Sophia is going to demonstrate the meaning of a newly created compound word. So sometimes the puzzle pieces just fit together. So just because she put butter plus fly together doesn't mean she understood the meaning of it. So we want to demonstrate the meaning. So it was not acceptable. One more. You guys are doing great, really great. So the measurable outcome says that Yi will solve one or two-step equations involving multiplication and or division with 80% accuracy and 100% independence. The brief description says that Yi accurately completed 8 out of 10 problems on IXL during morning group with Miss Sue, and no prompting was necessary. It was a good day. Acceptable or not? Okay, good job. 82. So we have 85% said it was not acceptable and 15% said that it was. So let's take a look. What was she supposed to do? The measurable outcome, the skill that we were looking at was solving equations with either multiplication or division. So when we look at the brief description, she completed 8 out of 10 problems, but on what? We don't know what it was. Could have been adding. We don't know. There's no explanation. And IXL, some of you may know that IXL is a computer program, but not everybody does. So be careful using those acronyms. And it's kind of limited the number of characters that you have in that space. So the fact that she worked with Miss Sue, it's everybody loves Miss Sue, but it's not really important. And the prompting, that's going to come out on the independence, right? We don't even need to add that. And I'm glad it was a good day, but again, unnecessary information. So this was not acceptable. And I hope for those of you that thought it was, you understand now the difference. So even though you as a teacher may know that 8 of the 10 problems were equations using multiplication, you have to explain that in the brief descriptions because we're not in your classroom. So let's talk about the primary evidence now. So we've done the data chart. We've looked at the brief descriptions that are on there. So now we're going to talk about the work sample description. So there's a label, and Kevin will show this at the end of the it's in the Forms and Graphs program, and it's going to have a place for you to put the student's name, the date, which I think Kevin will click for me. Thank you. So the dates for ELA and math are from July 1st through to submission date For science, even though we're not talking about science, remember I said it's the only one that goes over 2 years, but that doesn't really help you if you're new. However, if you're working with a student in grade 7, you could start now to collect it. You want to make sure that the dates for the classroom work is the same as when your school was in session. So no holidays or weekends or school vacations, snow days, that kind of thing. Okay, we'll go back. Thank you. And then we have the accuracy and independence. So all of that information, there's Alex, that's all the information we need. It's always a good idea to use these work sample description labels so you don't forget to add any of that important information. And then we have a place for you to give us the brief description. And there's a lot more space on this work sample description form that you can explain what and how. And sometimes it's helpful to go into a little more detail on here, but we are going to see the actual work that the student did. So here's the evidence that's produced by Alex, and you can see that it was about rounding. So that's the first piece of primary evidence. And then we'll have a second piece of primary evidence. So that same information is on there. You could see here, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes about the self-evaluation. You can attach it, you can put it here. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But this is the work sample description, and there are two. And again, if you have time, sometimes your students come in late in the year and you won't have time to do extra. But if you have time to put in an extra piece of evidence, that's fine. And so there's the student's actual evidence, and you can see all the information is on there. So that's primary evidence. What about photographs? What about if you're doing things that are temporary? You can do photographs because obviously you do things on whiteboards, you may do things, maybe you create a craft of some form that is still assessing the skill, and you're not going to send that in. You can take a picture. So in this case, the entry point is to compare the traits of main characters. And the brief descriptions talk about Jamal orally identifying character traits, and the teacher wrote them in the appropriate responses in the oversized Venn diagram. All the information is here: the student's name, the date that it was produced, accuracy, and independence. Now, this teacher even went in and did the prompting levels, what was independent and what was accurate. That's always helpful. It's always good as a reminder for you too, because sometimes you don't have time to calculate everything at the moment, so you just have to know when it was prompted. So this photo, it clearly shows this end product. Sometimes you might want to show a sequence of steps that lead to the final product. And you're going to make sure that the accuracy and independence is reflective of the evidence. So let's take a look at another. And obviously this was a whiteboard, and that can't go into temporary or large. So in this case, this student will match an action word to its corresponding picture. Do you think this photo clearly shows an image of the final product? It's a little tricky to see. Can't see what this other photo is. And I'm not sure, I know it's very small, but in the corner at the bottom, it says that the accuracy is 86% and the independence is 53%. That's not what the photograph is showing. So if you want to use a photo, but it doesn't show, it's only showing the context, then we're just going to call that supporting documentation. It is not primary evidence. Sometimes supporting documentation is very helpful, helps us understand how things are done, but it isn't going to be considered primary evidence. So no, it does not show final product here. Sometimes a teacher documented work sample would be better. And I'm sure you're wondering, what is a teacher documented work sample? This is one of those work samples, teacher documented work sample, that is kind of the cream of the crop. There is no definitive way that you have to do a teacher documented work sample. You just have to give us specific information. This teacher created their own form, and you can copy that form if you like it. But you can see that the measurable outcome is there. And this is for a student who isn't going to produce work. They're going to turn on technology to demonstrate ratio and proportional relationships, and they're going to press an access switch to turn the page about ratio and proportional relationships. And they're going to do that within 15 seconds of a directive. So that's a measurable outcome. So we know what the student is doing. They're going to hit that switch within 15 seconds. So it's going to turn the page. So the brief description tells us that during a work session, the student turned on the technology to turn the page for a teacher-made book on the computer within 15 seconds. This book is about ratio and proportional relationships. So we're in that context of standard-based activity, and she is going to push the button, it's going to turn the page. And it says for the farm animals are the pictures, and they're using the phrase for every cow, there are 4 legs. Remember, the student is not doing ratio and proportional relationships. We're just documenting how this student is participating and turning on that technology during a content-based activity. So we have the trial number. This teacher even did page numbers. And then, did she turn it on? Did she activate it? And what was the latency? How many seconds did they use in order for her to do it? So they have the accuracy and independence, and that's summarized at the bottom. You can see that. All the information that you need for scoring is here. How you put that together is up to you. And we do have access skill YouTube that you can look at, and it has some great examples of other ways in which you can document a student's work who isn't going to produce a written product. So you can document a series of trials. It's all going to be on the same day. It's going to include more information than what's just on that field data chart. And it's going to describe the material and the context. Again, everything I just showed you in that example, you can use it to create your own, or you can copy something like that. It's very helpful. And you're going to make sure that you're indicating the student's response, because that's what we want to know. You're assessing that student's response, accuracy, and independence for each of those items using their specific mode of communication. And just like every other piece of evidence, it has to have the name, date, accuracy, and independence. All that information must be on there. So now I'm going to stop talking. Kevin's going to come on and tell you some other ways that's acceptable for evidence.
Thank you, Deb. Welcome back, everyone. So I'll talk briefly about digital evidence, and then we'll switch gears again, and I'll open forms and graphs, and I'll show you how to create some of those data charts Deb was just relaying, and some of the other forms that go on to complete a strand. But for digital evidence, and what I mean by that is everything does get eventually put into the binder to be submitted. So you're not submitting anything online through that forms and graphs site. It does all go in the binder. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to print everything out. So if you've got a series of pictures, or what a lot of people also do, that we get a decent amount of, is can send a PowerPoint if you've got a series of slides that you've collected of the progression of activity, or things are in a Word doc. You can give us those files directly in any of the Microsoft Office. You don't have to print them all out. So you can put them on a flash drive and include them in with the student binder. You can also do videos. A little disclaimer on videos that they as you saw with that sample picture that Deb had that didn't show the final product, sometimes videos are great supporting evidence, but you can't really see what that final product was. It might show a great representation of the student working on a worksheet, but what we really need is that worksheet, not the process of them creating it. So use videos with a grain of salt, as they're great supporting, but they don't always show that final product very well. It's kind of tough depending on what you're doing. But if you do them, you don't want to give us a whole lesson on a video. It has to be a short little clip of 2 to 3 minutes, is what you do for the videos. The key of any of it, though, is because these are submitted in a binder, you have to make sure that it's one flash drive for each student. You don't want to put all 5 of your students on one flash drive and throw it in the box of when UPS picks them up, because when they're scored individually. We don't score them all from your same school at the same time and open the box. They get logged in and spiraled, and things go in different boxes. So when we are at the time of scoring, we need that evidence in that actual binder. So don't share them across your students. If you're going to do digital evidence, it has to be one flash drive for each student, tucked right into the binder. And it's helpful if you're putting files on there of pictures or anything to rename the files. Just call it ELA language, or math, or something other than the generic 6789.jpg, which isn't always helpful to know what matches what. It's helpful if you kind of name the file what it is that it's being attached to. It'll help you know you put the right one in there, and then when it's scored, they know where to go looking to open the right file. So after I get into forms and graphs, we'll pop back and do a little bit of questions, and then Deb will take over. But let me switch gears right now, and we'll go back to forms and graphs, and I'll show you those data charts and other forms. So one moment. Okay, so here we are. We're back on our login page, kind of where we left it from this morning. But let's go back to our login page, and we're just going to sign into the account I have going. Here's our friend Alex. We'll continue to build out that math sample. Member this morning, we created the strand cover sheet and the skill survey for number and operations in base 10. So let's hop back into Alex. But let's get back to what you came for, of how to do the strand, in this case, that number and operations base 10. So we already did our skill survey. We're going to hop into our strand list, and it should be hanging out here waiting for us. And there it is, our math number and operations base 10. Let's go to cover sheet, and we'll scroll down. We did the top half of this form this morning. We've got our learning standard in there. Remember, we did an entry point. Here's our entry point that we selected with the popular big red button, find entry points. Line 6, maybe you use, maybe you don't. It's certainly not a requirement. And what the intent of this line 6 is this is any accommodations or modification the student routinely had when you were collecting the evidence for the strand. So this isn't every accommodation that's in their IEP. You don't have to list it every single time. Think of it as if somebody was the outside looking in, this is your chance to tell them a little something about the evidence that might not be obvious looking at the actual work. So was this scribed? Did the student use a device to create the sample that isn't evident just looking at the work itself? Were they using an AAC system? It's just a big text box, and you can type. And again, most of you probably don't need to use that, but it is there just to sort of help describe what it is that you're going to be attaching, both by way of student work on the data chart or the actual physical evidence that you're submitting. So that's the intent behind question number 6. But the real work is down below, where you have an opportunity to create the data charts and the work description labels that get attached to the actual evidence. I'm going to go back to Alex's sample that we're looking at. He did a bar chart, so I'll show you how to do a bar chart. Just know that the line graph and the bar graph are exactly the same. They get created exactly the same. It's just that final product. Either you get bars or you get lines. So I'll show you the bar, but no line is the same, just you get a different product in the end. Field data chart is a little bit different, and I'll show you a quick sample of that just in case you want to use it. It's the least used of the data charts, but remember, you just want to do one of them. You're not combining a bar graph and a field data chart or a bar and a line. You have to choose one of these to act as the data chart requirement. Remember, it's a data chart and at least two pieces of evidence with on that data chart showing at least 8 different dates of work. So let's jump right in. So to create the thing it is you want to work on, you just click on the name. So let's do a bar graph, and we get this little grid that'll start building out at the bottom. And let's drop in some work description labels while we're at it. So this sort of represents the bare minimum. We've got the workings of a bar graph and then 2 work description labels to attach to our 2 pieces of evidence. To jump in to create work, and I'll come back to this my description in just a second. I'll show you when we get into the work description labels what this is intended for, but just trust me for now, it has a purpose and we'll come back to it. But let's start to look at the bar graph. So we'll click go to evidence page, and everything we have right now, so we've got the student's name, it's brought over everything that we've selected. I just like to point out, notice on the measurable outcome, before it was a text box and I could change it from that strand cover sheet. Now it's just a label. It's just text. I'm trying to click in here to change it, and it by design, it will not let you change it. So you don't want to create a data chart and have one measurable outcome and then do a piece of evidence and choose a different measurable outcome for that. It has to be unified across everything you do this for this strand. So the same measurable outcome for everything that's on the data chart, and your at least 2 pieces of evidence all have to address the same measurable outcome. So it will not let you change it on any of the individual sheets. It has to link back to whatever you have on that strand cover sheet. But to start to put in the data for the graph, to generate the graph, it's basically data entry. So we've got 10 slots here. Remember, the minimum is at least 8, so we give you up to 10, just in case you want to do a little bit more. But 8 is the minimum. So to start putting in the data, you click edit on the line that you want to activate, and it'll turn it on for you to start entering dates. So we're looking at Alex's sample. That first one is on 10/4/24, and he was 0% accurate. And in this case, 100% independent. And remember the rule, this first data point, so whatever your first date on your data chart, has to be below 80 on at least one of these. So 0 is below 80. So I know even though this one's above, that's okay. As long as accuracy or independence is below 80%, it's an acceptable place to start. You just can't have them both be above 80. If these are 100, that's not a valid data point, but 0% accurate and 100% independence is good. And then do some copy and pasting, and then we get a text box. It does give you a general character count of what will fit, and you don't have a whole lot of room to write in here, but it should get you close. You don't want to be overly elaborate. You don't have to tell a story per se in here with full complete paragraphs. You want to get right to what did the student do and how did they do it. You don't even have to put the student's name in here. It's just assumed that that is, in this case, for Alex, because this is Alex's data chart. So sentence fragments are fine. You don't even have to do complete sentences. As long as anybody can look at that and say, I can clearly see what the student did and how they did it, and it matches the measurable outcome that you selected, then you are good to go. So you've got a decent amount of room, but you don't have to go nuts. You don't have to write a full paragraph describing what occurred that day. So we can save this. If you're doing data entry, if you save it up and enter it all at once, you can actually just click edit of the next line, and it'll lock in that first one. So I won't do all 8, you'll get the point. It's kind of a lather, rinse, repeat. In this case, it's the same, but I'll do 2 just to show you so you get the idea. So that next on Alex's bar graph was on 2/7, and here he is actually 100% independent or accurate and 50%. independent, and then we've got is given a worksheet with 4 3-digit numbers, and we'll save this. And you might be looking this and thinking, that's great. How do I get the actual data chart out of that? And there's a couple different ways. So when you're on this page, anywhere you see printer friendly that's something that's intended to be printed and attached as a complete strand when you send this in. So if I click this, I'm going to get a little pop-up that says this looks better landscape, so wide when you print it and not portrait tall. You have to change that on the actual printer that you're sending it to. That's not something we control here. So when I click OK, that's what generates the graph. I'm a little zoomed in here, but you can see it. We'll do the graph. Here's my descriptions down here below, and it carries over everything. So that's what you would, and once you do your minimum of at least 8 different dates on that, that's what generates the, in this case, bar graph. Line graph is 100% the same. Just when I click that button, I get lines instead of bars, but everything else is identical. There is a better way to print that out, and I'll show you that in just a second as we do some additional work in this strand. But that's the bar graph. So let's go back to our strand cover sheet, and we do that again with our red navigation bar. We can go into our strand cover sheet, and that'll take us right back to where we started for the strand. Now let's take a quick look at these work sample description labels, and then I'll show you a quick sample of a field data chart. So with this, you can go to evidence page, and this is where these my descriptions can be a little bit helpful. So when I click this first one, and what you see here, that my description, that little yellow box, you do not have to fill this out. This is just here for you. I like to refer to it as a little breadcrumb trail for yourself. You want to be more descriptive than this, but like say this was reading and you were doing this about a story about a snowman, you could write, this is the snowman story. And all this does is when I save this, when I go back to that strand cover sheet, whatever I type in that box shows up here. And it's helpful because these are all generically named work sample description label. So it's just there for you to know this is that one, and this next one is about something else. So if you need to go in and out of these, you know which one you're going into. You don't have to open and close them if you don't remember the order that you created them. So that's its only purpose. It's there just for you to give yourself a little description so you know what's what. But you don't have to use it if you don't want to. It's there just for that purpose. And then the work sample description is mostly just plug and chug. It's just asking for a few pieces of information. So the intent of this is it gets attached to the actual evidence. So let's look at Alex's. His first was on 10/17/24. It was 100% accurate and 73% independence. Self-evaluation, stick with me for now. Deb will talk about this coming up. So this is just a text box. So as Deb tells you about different ways to do self-evaluation, this will make more sense. So you can describe how the student participated, if they made a choice, if they wanted to include this as their work, if they thought this was really hard or really easy, or they liked it or they hated it. Some people, as Deb will show you, they have a standardized form that the student can fill out and circle what they liked and didn't like for self-evaluation. So you can just write see attached, which, trust me, this will make sense as Deb gets to it. We're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit in this case. But just remember that it's just a text box for you to describe how self-evaluation took place, is all that's trying to do. And then here we have a description of what the student was asked to do on that evidence and how they did it, of what you're attaching. So this is a nice big text box. You can get really elaborate if you want to here, if it's not overly apparent of the evidence that you're attaching. So if you're doing a worksheet, you can set up the worksheet the student did, how they did it, and what the worksheet was showing. But this is just a big old text box of exactly as the label describes what the student was asked to do and how they did it. So you can just type right in here. There, and that's really it. And then you can, again, print this independently and attach it to the evidence, and then that all combines together to form a complete strand with your their cover page, skill survey, and data chart, and at least 2 pieces of evidence. So let's go back to the strand cover sheet, and I will show you that field data chart in just a second, but I've alluded to a better way to print this that's a little easier for you. So from the strand cover sheet, remember you have to be from the strand cover sheet in order to get this option. Notice it doesn't say printer friendly, now it says print options. And what it'll get when I do this is I can print just the strand cover sheet. If something happened to it, or I just want to print it by itself and I want to replace it, you can just do this one solo. But print multiple, what it will do is it will stitch all this stuff together for you. So it'll grab the cover sheet, look back and grab the skills survey. So if I do print multiple, a new tab will open up. And we'll come back to this in just a second. Here's our cover sheet. Make this a little smaller. It looks back and grabs the proper skills survey. And then here's that first description label that we slightly built out, and then we didn't do anything to the second, so it's just going to be blank. But any up to 5 that you've created for work sample description labels, it'll automatically put them in with page breaks. You print these out and it'll break the pages appropriately when you print them out. So you might be asking, where's that data chart that we were working on? Because these are, as I mentioned, you have to change from landscape to portrait. It needs to generate it on its own little tab in order to fit it in with these that are basically portrait. So you click here and you'll get a new tab with just the data chart that you had for whatever version, field, bar, line, whatever one you created, it'll generate it for you here. So in 2 clicks, you can print it all and you don't have to keep opening and closing and printing one at a time. But let's take a little step back, and in real world, you wouldn't do this, but I want to show you the field data chart. You would never have a field data chart and a bar graph, but for sake of just showing you how the field data chart works, let's pretend that we didn't do the bar graph. And in this case, we want to do a field data chart. And before I do that, actually, let's delete our bar graph. And I mentioned this morning that there are some hard deletes in here. This is one of them, and it can be a big one if you're not paying attention. If you delete this bar graph, it is gone for good. It deletes it from the database to make way for whatever the new data chart that you're going to put in there as the default will be. So it will warn you. It'll say, are you sure you want to delete this? And if you click OK, it is gone for good. There is no restoring it. It is, you can call tech support and they'll say, I understand, I'm sorry, I can't bring it back. It is deleted from the database. So I'm going to delete it because I want to delete it because I'm going to do a field data chart and it is gone. So let's take a quick look at the components of how you work with a field data chart. It is a little bit different. It's a lot more data entry. So let's go into that field data chart. The top looks kind of the same, but as you scroll down, you see, whoops, things look a little different down below. So I'm not just doing a single accuracy and independence and a brief description. It has all of these trials. So what this is doing, we still have, I'll scroll all the way down, you'll see it goes all the way down to the 10 dates again. Still the minimum is you do this for at least 8 dates, but it's just a lot more data entry. So the theory behind this is on this day, we did a series of trials on one activity that you can still describe here, but each column is a trial. So accurate was a student accurate, which is the plus. This key is here to describe what it is. So accurate is plus. Did they do it independently? Were they I for independent, or did they need to be prompted in order for the first trial? And then it is just a matter of filling out the various. So in this case, we had at least 4 trials. You can leave the rest just blank or the default of N, and it won't include them in the calculation. So try 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this case with our description. And this time, when I save this page and print, it'll stitch it all together for me. It'll put it in to a field data chart with our trials underneath that date. It'll do the math for you of what you had for accurate and independent or prompted. And then we get our description here. So you don't have to tabulate all that in this overall accuracy and independence down here. It'll do it column by column in each of these rows for you. But that's the intent. It's a series of trials within at least 8 different days is what makes up that field data chart. So by far the most commonly used are the bar and line, but if you, particularly in access skills, sometimes they'll lean more towards a field data chart, just based on the series of trials that they're doing on a dedicated access skill, it might come into play, but that's how you do it. So let's go back to our strand cover sheet. And that's it. So any math strand, this is the formula that you'll have a skill survey and then a cover sheet, and then at least 2 works description labels with evidence attached on each, and then a data chart showing at least 8 different dates documenting the skill with accuracy and independence on each. So I will now give it back to Deb. And I also want to say you have the luxury of time. Doing this training at this point in the year is very different than somebody starting anew, say in February. Feel free to play with this site as you get in there. Go to that student list and just add a new student and make one up. Name it fake student if you want to, and just play. You can always delete it out. Nobody's going to come in here and look and say, why do you have a fake student? This isn't how you submit the final work. It all has to turn into a binder. So there's nothing wrong with just going in here and tinkering around and just getting the lay of the land to understand how all this works. Feel free. I advocate learn by doing, just by creating an account and playing around with it. But now I will shut this down and bring back the PowerPoint, and Deb will move on to a better understanding of how to document accuracy and independence. So back to you, Deb.
All right, I'm going to move on to calculating accuracy and independence. So I think one of the things that's pretty easy for most of us, I mean, with a calculator, of course, but I'm just kidding. The accuracy, it's either right or wrong. But the independence is always a little bit tricky. Like, how do I calculate? How do I know how independent they were? So there is really a formula. And so you can see here, this is Michael's, and he's doing idioms. And there are 8 sentences. And of those sentences, you'll see in the box there are 7 correct responses. And so the 7 correct responses calculates to 88%. And then they had 6 of the 8 were independent. So we're looking for independence. So 6 of 8 independent responses is equivalent to 75%. The trick to this is having a little help or a good way of catching that prompting or not prompting. So we want to make sure we understand that first. Accommodations to me are just leveling the playing field, right? If they use a reader, whether it's a human reader or a text reader, if they have a scribe because their handwriting's so poor they can't physically write, that's just leveling the playing field for them. Using a calculator, cueing them, if you cue them for, say, pick up your pencil or show me you're ready, that is not a prompt. And you need to explain this to everybody who's working with this student. You need to be very clear the difference between a prompt and an accommodation. And in a prompt, you are getting the student closer to the answer. Okay, accommodation is just leveling the playing field and allowing them to have access to the content. So for example, if the student's working on a computer program and they choose the wrong answer and it eliminates that answer, so you have fewer choices, that's a prompt. If you guide them by saying, you need to go back and write more on question 2, or you need to look at answer 5, you are getting them closer to the answer because obviously it wasn't the answer that you expected or wanted. Okay. Anytime you do hand over hand assistance, that's always considered a non-independent response. So Make sure you know the difference. Make sure you explain it to whether it's a volunteer or a paraprofessional, whoever's working with your student, that you're clear on that. And it doesn't matter with MCAS-Alt what kind of prompt it is, whether it's verbal, visual, physical, or gestural. Those are still prompts. If you care, that's different, but not in MCAS-Alt world. We don't care whether it's gestural or physical. Okay. Just whether it's a prompt. And once you figure out what works, then you need a system because your classroom gets busy, right? People are always moving around, they're in and out. Perhaps you're doing a worksheet and you have a paraprofessional working with them. How do you know when they prompt? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to remember how many they prompted. So one of our consultants started using a green pen, and she would just put a green dot next to the ones that were prompted that the student needed help with. At the end of the day, then you can go back. The accuracy is easy to figure out which one's right or wrong. But when you see the green dot, it's like, oh yeah, okay, they were prompted. That way you can calculate the accuracy and the independence and not have to try to remember at the end of your busy day. So here's an example. This student is going to answer questions about a book read in the classroom. So you think about what's the skill that you're asking the student to do and how will they perform the skill? In this case, the student's going to orally answer. You know that every time they answer the question, you're going to give them how many times you're going to give them an opportunity to answer that question. And that's going to be a chance for you to see how many are accurate responses and how many are independent. Now, if you're leading the classroom, you might not be able to do that. You might have somebody else helping you with that because maybe you have 3 students that you're asking those questions. Okay, so you have to have a good setup so you know who is helping whom, and then you can keep track of the independence. One thing I'd like to point out is you want to make sure that you're giving students that opportunity to perform the skill multiple times throughout the day, right? It doesn't have to be just one time. Maybe it's multiple times throughout the day that you're going to collect accuracy and independence. But anytime you give them that opportunity, you can collect accuracy and independence on it. And self-evaluation. This is for all content area, not just the ELA reading, language, and math. It's for all of it. So we want to make sure that the student has a choice to it has a choice to look at their work, reflect on their work. How did they do? You can ask them those questions. You can set it up for that. You can have the students select the work for their binder so that we've already talked about at the beginning, having them draw a picture or talk about who they were. It's invested in this learning. So you pick a few pieces of work that you would want to put in the binder, and then you let them make that choice. And that's an self-evaluation. They can choose the materials. They can choose who they work with. They can help to set goals. They can graph their goals. Perhaps you have a checklist that they can check off or a scoring rubric, depending on the level of your student. So there's various ways. One way that is not self-evaluation is when you put a sticker on it or write awesome. We want this to be from the student. Here's some examples of that self-evaluation. And I ask you to, if you're going to do these self-evaluations, do them right after you do the work. Don't wait until March and give them 15 of these to fill out because they don't remember what they did. The point is to reflect on the work as they're doing it. You can definitely use the same self-evaluation. In this case, the teacher wrote, the activity today was called. Now, maybe your student can't fill out what it was called and you fill that out. Perhaps they can't circle. You can circle the answers if they tell you. But this is a nice way It can be used for all content areas. Here's some other examples. There's some Mayor Johnson pictures, and they make them where they have the choice of what did you work on today, whether it was reading, math, science. I guess that would now be changed to civics, but it could be something like that. They looked at their work. Did they do their best work? Sometimes they say things like it was boring, but at least they are thinking about their work. In this one, the teacher printed labels like those Avery labels, and on that she just had self-evaluation with little smiley faces, and that was just automatically put on any worksheet that the student did, and then they would talk about it after the work was done and the student colored it in. Some students use bingo dabbers. These are all examples that teachers came up with. And again, you don't have to recreate the wheel. If you see something you like, you can copy it. That's what we teachers do best. Here's a fun one. Obviously, the student liked the Big Bang Theory, so the teacher created a self-evaluation on their favorite TV show. And here's another one that's a checklist format. These are all great ideas. And again, you can do what works best for you and for your student. Sometimes it's just a matter of the student, especially if our access skills are low entry students, maybe just saying all done before they clear off the tray is a way to say they're self-evaluating. I am done. So putting things in a bucket and being all done. So think about ways in which you can self-evaluate with your student. So final questions, final thoughts. Remember, there are samples on the department's website. And if you have questions for the department, any kind of policy questions or questions that pertain to, I have a student who, remember to do MCAS at mass.gov. I do want to thank all of you for showing up and coming back this afternoon and sticking with us. Remember, the educator manual is your best friend, has all the information you need if you can't get a hold of someone. So here's information for you, the MCAS at mass.gov. There's the phone number and there's the website. Thank you to all of you.